I did not transfer my inheritance out of jealousy. I moved it because the way he looked at our home had changed, as if he were mentally splitting it in half. 2 weeks later, he filed for divorce, but what broke him in that mediation room was not my tears. It was a thin folder and one sentence I had prepared. By the time he finally understood the nature of his victory, it was far too late to run. My name is Isla Mitchell, and at 45 years of age, I was sitting in a high-rise conference room in downtown Nashville, watching the man I had loved for 2 decades prepare to destroy me. The air conditioning in the room was humming a low, artificial drone that seemed to vibrate against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Outside, the city was alive with the heat and music of a Tuesday afternoon, but inside, the atmosphere was sterile and cold enough to preserve dead tissue. I kept my hands folded on my lap, resting on the leather strap of my handbag. My posture was perfect. My face was a blank canvas. I had practiced this stillness in the mirror for 3 days straight, teaching myself to breathe without moving my shoulders, teaching my eyes not to dart around the room like a trapped animal. Across the massive mahogany table, my husband, Grant, was leaning back in his chair with an ease that made my stomach turn. He looked revitalized. He was wearing the charcoal suit I had picked out for him last Christmas, the one that made his shoulders look broader, and he had the fresh, slightly pink complexion of a man who had just come from a facial. Grant did not look like a man whose marriage was ending. He looked like a man who had just closed a very profitable deal and was waiting for the champagne to arrive. Next to him sat Darren Pike, his attorney. Pike was a man who took up too much space. He had a thick neck, a loud tie, and a voice that sounded like a chainsaw cutting through wet wood. He had spent the last 20 minutes laying out their demands, his thick fingers chopping the air with every point he made to emphasize his dominance. He spoke about equitable distribution and marital assets with a hunger that was almost palpable. "We are looking for a 50-50 split of the primary residence," Pike said, not even bothering to look at me. He was addressing my lawyer, Renee Salazar, as if I were merely a piece of furniture in the room. Furthermore, regarding the inheritance Mrs. Mitchell received 6 months ago, we have evidence of intent to commingle. The funds were verbally committed to the expansion of Iron Hollow Freight and Dispatch. Therefore, we are moving to include the inheritance in the total marital pot for immediate division. I felt the blood drain from my extremities, but I did not move. This was it, the ambush. Grant was watching me. He was waiting for the outburst. He knew me as the emotional one, the one who cried during insurance commercials, the one who would bend over backward to keep the peace. He expected me to gasp, to look at him with betrayed eyes, to beg him not to take the money my aunt had left me. That money was not just currency, it was the only thing I had left of my family. It was the safety net he had sworn he would never touch. But Pike was still talking. He was listing numbers now. He was talking about liquidating assets. He was talking about $2 million as if he were ordering lunch. He claimed that because Grant had leveraged business loans based on the promise of that money, the inheritance was now effectively fair game. It was a reach, a legal gray area that they were trying to paint black and white. Then it happened. Grant caught my eye. He shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his cuffs, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a smirk that I knew better than the back of my own hand. It was the smile he used when he beat me at tennis. It was the smile he used when he managed to talk a traffic cop out of a speeding ticket. He winked at me. It was a small, quick gesture, a single eyelid dropping and rising. To anyone else, it might have looked like a tick. To me, it was a declaration of war. That wink said everything. It said, "I won." It said, "You are stupid for trusting me." It said, "Thanks for the money." Isla, time seemed to slow down. The hum of the air conditioner faded into a dull roar. That wink was the final nail in the coffin of the man I thought I had married. The Grant I knew, the man who used to warm my side of the bed before I got in, was dead. The man sitting across from me was a stranger who viewed our history as a transaction and my future as collateral damage. I did not wink back. I did not frown. I simply turned my head 2 inches to the left and looked at Renee. Renee Salazar was the opposite of Darren Pike. She was small, sharp, and silent. She had not said a word since we sat down. She had let Pike bluster and threaten. She had let Grant preen and posture. She had waited. Renee adjusted her glasses. She did not open the thick binder of rebuttals that Pike probably expected. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single, thin manila folder. It was light, containing no more than 3 or 4 sheets of paper. She slid the folder across the polished mahogany surface. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was a soft hiss that cut through the silence like a razor. The folder came to a stop right in front of Darren Pike's clenched hands. Pike stopped mid-sentence. He looked down at the folder, then up at Renee. Annoyed at the interruption, "What is this?" Pike asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "If this is a plea for spousal support, we can discuss that after we settle the asset division." Renee smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just watched the trap snap shut. "That is not a plea," Renee said. Her voice was calm, low, and terrifyingly steady. "That is a notification of current asset standing." Grant leaned forward. His curiosity piqued. He reached out and flipped the folder open. I watched his eyes scan the top document. I saw the exact second the words registered in his brain. His brow furrowed first, then his mouth opened slightly, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. The smug color in his cheeks drained away, leaving him looking sickly and gray, like wet ash. He blinked once, twice, 3 times, trying to make the numbers on the page change. They did not change. "What is this?" Grant whispered. His voice cracked. It was a pathetic sound. Pike snatched the paper from him. "What do you mean?" Pike's eyes widened as he read. "This says the account is empty. This says the funds were transferred." Grant looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was obliterated. In its place was a raw, naked panic that I had never seen in him before. He looked like a man who had stepped out of an airplane, only to realize he had forgotten his parachute. Isla Grant said my name like it was a question in a foreign language. "Isla, where is the money? You were supposed to move it to the joint account. We have the closing in 2 days. Where is the money?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had winked at me 10 seconds ago. Renee leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table. "Mr. Mitchell," Renee said, savoring the moment. "Mr. Pike here has been talking for 20 minutes about how he intends to carve up the pie. He has been very specific about who gets what slice. But before you continue, you should know one thing." Renee paused. She let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "Today, there is no pie." The room went dead silent. The only sound was Grant's heavy breathing. He was staring at me with a look of absolute horror, his mind racing, trying to figure out how the sure thing had become a disaster. He was trying to calculate the ruin that was heading for him. He was thinking about the loans, the promises he had made, the debt he was hiding. He looked at me, begging for an explanation, begging for me to tell him it was a mistake. But I just sat there, my hand resting on my purse, listening to the air conditioner hum. To understand why a grown man would look that terrified over a bank transfer, and to understand why I felt absolutely no pity for him. You have to understand what happened 3 weeks ago. You have to go back to the day I realized that my husband was not just falling out of love with me, but that he was actively calculating my expiration date. You do not spend 22 years with a person without learning the rhythm of their breathing. You learn how they take their coffee, how they fold their socks, and exactly how they look when they are lying. For over 2 decades, Grant and I were not just a married couple, we were a single organism. We moved through life with the synchronized efficiency of a well-oiled machine. We did not have children. It was not a tragedy we spoke of often, just a quiet fact of our biology that we accepted early on. Instead of soccer practices and college funds, we poured our fertility into ambition. We raised a business instead of a family. I remember the early days of Iron Hollow Freight and Dispatch. I remember the smell of stale coffee and diesel fumes in that tiny rented office above a dry cleaner on 4th Avenue. I was 23, with a degree in logistics that I put on a shelf so I could answer phones. balance the books, and drive Grant to meetings when his old sedan broke down. I built the operational framework of that company while he sold the dream. I was the spine, and he was the face. We were partners, or at least, I thought we were. But people change. Sometimes they change like the seasons, gradual and expected, and sometimes they change like a house settling, with sudden cracks appearing in the drywall overnight. The shift began about 6 months ago. It was subtle at first, the kind of things you brush off as stress or midlife fatigue. Grant started locking his phone. For 15 years, his passcode had been our anniversary, 4 simple digits that I could type in my sleep. One morning, I reached for his phone to check the weather while he was in the shower, and the code was wrong. When I asked him about it, he snapped at me. He said he needed better security for work, that I was being nosy. He turned the screen face down on the nightstand every single night, a small, black rectangle of secrecy between us. Then came the criticism. It was not loud. Grant was never a shouter. He was a sniper. He picked me apart with quiet, surgical precision. We were getting ready for a dinner party at a neighbor's house in early April. I was wearing a navy silk dress that I had owned for years, one that used to make him look at me with a certain kind of hunger. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, smoothing the fabric over my hips. Grant walked in, buttoning his shirt. He stopped behind me, meeting my eyes in the reflection. He did not smile. He tilted his head, inspecting me like a used car he was reconsidering buying. "That dress is a bit ambitious, isn't it?" he said. His voice was casual, light. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. "I just mean that cuts like that are unforgiving. Isla, we are not 25 anymore. Maybe something with sleeves, or something looser. You do not want to look like you are trying too hard. It comes off as desperate." I took the dress off. I wore a shapeless black tunic instead. I spent the entire night pulling at the hem, feeling gray and invisible, while Grant charmed the room. That was his new game. He made me feel small so he could feel big. He made comments about my hair, asking why I did not dye the silver streaks that were coming in at the temples, calling them a sign of giving up. He told me I was boring him when I talked about books. He told me I had lost my edge. For months, I walked around my own house on eggshells, wondering what I had done wrong. I bought expensive creams. I joined a Pilates studio. I tried to become the woman he seemed to want, but nothing worked. The colder he got, the harder I tried, and the more pathetic I felt. Yet, despite his constant complaints about money and the rising cost of our lifestyle, there were signs that did not add up. He started coming home late, smelling of a cologne that he did not own, something musky and expensive. He had the energy of a younger man, that nervous, electric buzz of someone who is infatuated. I would catch him smiling at his phone, a soft, private smile that vanished the second I entered the room. He became obsessed with the household budget, scrutinizing grocery receipts for $5 here or $10 there. He claimed the business was struggling, that cash flow was tight, that we needed to tighten our belts. I believed him. I stopped buying clothes. I canceled subscriptions. I tried to be the good, supportive wife, but I noticed something else. Grant was waiting for something. He checked his watch constantly, not to see the time, but as if he were counting down. He had the restless anxiety of a gambler waiting for the race results to come in. That was when my Aunt Margaret passed away. She was the only family I had left. A stubborn, brilliant woman who had never married and had invested wisely in commercial real estate back in the 80s. When the will was read, Grant sat next to me, holding my hand. He did not look sad. He looked attentive. He looked like a wolf watching a butcher carve a carcass. Aunt Margaret left me everything. There was a liquid sum of $1,800,000 and the deed to a commercial storage lot near the airport that was currently leased to a logistics firm, a prime piece of real estate that generated passive income every month. The money was substantial. It was life-changing, and because Aunt Margaret had been protective of me, the will was specific. It was left to Isla Mitchell, not Grant and Isla, just Isla. The change in Grant was immediate. The night after the funeral, the criticism stopped. The phone was still locked, but he stopped snapping at me. He stopped telling me I looked old. Instead, he started talking about our future. He started talking about how we could finally expand Iron Hollow, how we could use that money to pay off the business loans and buy a new fleet of trucks. He did not ask if I wanted to invest. He assumed. He spoke of the inheritance as if it were a winning lottery ticket we had bought together. But the most terrifying moment came 3 weeks before the mediation. On a Tuesday evening, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad. Grant came up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist and buried his face in my neck. He hadn't touched me like that in 2 years. "You know, Isla," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "I have been thinking. We have been so stressed lately. I have been distant, and I'm sorry. I want to make it up to you. Once we get the financing sorted for the business expansion, once we get this money moved over and working for us, I think we should renew our vows. Maybe Italy. Just the two of us. A fresh start." I stood there, holding the knife, my body rigid. His voice was warm. His words were perfect. It was everything I had been desperate to hear for 6 months. He turned me around and kissed me, deep and hard. But when he pulled away, I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second. His eyes weren't looking at me with love. They were scanning my face to see if I bought the act. It was a calculation. He was looking at me the way a fisherman looks at a line, waiting for the tug. He was not in love with me again. He was in love with the wire transfer he thought was coming. That night, as he slept soundly beside me, snoring softly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fans spinning in the dark. The coldness of the last 6 months had hurt me, yes, but this sudden warmth, this fake, sticky sweetness designed to lure me into signing away my birthright. This was not just painful, it was dangerous. The man I married would never have used my grief as a leverage point. The man I married would never have weaponized intimacy for a bank balance. I realized then that I wasn't sleeping next to my husband. I was sleeping next to a con artist who knew exactly which buttons to push, and I knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that if I gave him access to that money, the divorce papers would follow before the check even cleared. He was counting down the days. So, I decided to start counting too. The following Friday evening, Grant brought home a bottle of expensive Cabernet and a glossy, heavy-stock brochure that smelled of fresh printer ink. He laid it on the coffee table between us like a peace offering, or perhaps a holy scripture. The cover featured an aerial shot of a massive industrial complex, gleaming steel and concrete under the bright Tennessee sun, with the words, "The Gateway Distribution Hub," embossed in silver. "This is it, Isla," Grant said, pouring 2 glasses of wine with a steady hand. He sat down next to me, close enough that our knees touched. "This is the game changer. This is the reset button we have been talking about." I took the glass, careful not to let my fingers brush against his. I looked at the brochure. It was a proposal for a minority stake in a new logistics facility near the airport. It was the kind of facility Iron Hollow needed to compete with the big national carriers' temperature-controlled bays. Automated sorting. The works. 20 years ago. Seeing this would have made my heart race with excitement for what we could build. Now, it just looked like a very expensive piece of bait. Grant started his pitch. He spoke with a fervor I had not seen in years, his eyes wide and shining. He talked about legacy. He talked about security. He talked about how this investment would generate enough passive revenue that we could retire in 5 years. He painted a picture of our golden years traveling, relaxing, being free of the daily grind. He used the word us in every other sentence, our future, our retirement, our legacy. Then came the ask. "The developers are looking for serious partners," Grant explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They need to see strength. They need to see liquidity. I have already been pre-approved for the financing on the business side, but the bank requires a show of personal reserves to finalize the interest rate. They need to see that we have a safety net." I took a sip of wine. It tasted like vinegar. I asked him what exactly he needed. "I need you to transfer the inheritance funds into our joint savings account," he said. He said it casually, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "Just for a few weeks. It is called proof of liquidity. We do not even have to spend it. Isla. It just needs to sit there, visible in the joint ledger, to reassure the underwriters that we are solvent. Once the deal closes, we can move it back. The air in the living room seemed to vanish. I stared at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral, while my mind screamed. I knew exactly what he was doing. I had handled contracts for 2 decades. I knew that the moment my separate property money that was legally mine and mine alone touched a joint marital account, it underwent a process called commingling. In the eyes of the law, it would cease to be an inheritance and become a shared marital asset. If we divorced 10 minutes later, he would be entitled to half of it. If we divorced a week later, he could argue that the entire amount was intended for the marital partnership. He was not asking for a loan. He was asking me to voluntarily walk into a cage and hand him the key. I hesitated. I set my wine glass down on a coaster. I told him that I was not comfortable moving that amount of money without speaking to a financial advisor first. I suggested that perhaps we could provide a letter of solvency from my separate bank instead. The transformation was instantaneous. The warm, loving husband vanished. The shine in his eyes hardened into cold flint. Grant pulled back, creating physical distance between us on the sofa. He let out a sharp, frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Really, Isla?" he asked, his voice laced with disappointment. "This is how it is going to be. I am trying to build something for us. I am trying to secure our old age, and you are talking about advisors. Do you not trust me?" He looked at me with a wounded expression that was so perfectly crafted it almost worked. "I thought we were partners," he continued, shaking his head. "I thought you wanted this marriage to work, but every time I try to move us forward, you pull back. Do you want a future with me, or are you already planning an exit strategy?" It was a masterclass in manipulation. He had set a trap with 2 doors, and both led to my destruction. If I refused, I was the paranoid, unsupportive wife who killed his dream and ruined our marriage. I would be the villain, if I agreed. I would be the fool who financed her own divorce settlement. He leaned in again, softening his voice, trying the honey once more. "Look, honey, I know it is a lot of money, but there is a timeline. The developers have other interested parties. If we do not show proof of funds by Monday morning, the deal goes to someone else. We lose the spot. It has to be Monday. Monday. Today was Friday night." He was creating artificial urgency. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to make an emotional decision over the weekend, so I would be standing at the bank teller's window first thing Monday morning. I looked at the brochure again. The Gateway Distribution Hub. It looked perfect. It looked legitimate, and that was what made it so terrifying. I realized then that I could not fight him here. Not tonight. If I said no, he would escalate. He would rage. He would make the weekend a living hell, and I would lose the opportunity to find out what was really happening. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to lower his guard so I could see what lay behind this sudden desperation. I forced a smile. It felt tight on my face, but Grant did not notice. He was too busy watching for the surrender. "Okay," I said softly. "You are right. I am sorry. Grant, I am just nervous about the numbers, but I trust you." Grant exhaled, a long sound of relief that seemed to deflate his entire body. He reached out and squeezed my knee. "Thank you," he said. "You will not regret this. Isla, I promise." I told him I would go to the bank on Monday morning to authorize the wire transfer. I told him I wanted to handle it in person to make sure there were no errors with the routing numbers. "Perfect," he said. "That is perfect. For the rest of the evening." Grant was euphoric. He poured more wine. He put on a jazz record we used to listen to in our 30s. He was charming, attentive, and energetic. But every few minutes, I saw him check his phone. He wasn't using his primary iPhone, the one he kept face down on the table. He was using an older model, one I thought he had discarded years ago, which he kept in his pocket. He would slide it out, tap out a quick message, and then slide it back, all while maintaining a conversation about our hypothetical trip to Italy. I watched him from the kitchen island while I pretended to rinse the wine glasses. He was smiling at the screen. It was not a business smile. It was a gloating smile. I walked past him to get a napkin and glanced over his shoulder. The font size was large, and for a split second, I saw the contact name at the top of the chat, Warehouse Broker. I paused. Why would he be texting a commercial real estate broker at 9 o'clock on a Friday night? And why did the message he just sent end with a winking emoji? Brokers did not get winking emojis. Brokers got term sheets and counteroffers. Grant looked up, sensing my presence, and immediately locked the screen. He smiled at me, but the warmth did not reach his eyes. It was a mask, slipping just enough for me to see the machinery underneath. "Who is that?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Just the developer," he said smoothly, letting him know we are good for Monday. He is excited to have us on board. I nodded and went upstairs to bed. I lay there in the dark, listening to him hum to himself downstairs. He thought he had played me perfectly. He thought that on Monday morning, I would walk into the bank and sign away my leverage. But I made a different decision. I would not be going to the bank on Monday. Instead, I was going to follow him. I needed to know who Warehouse Broker really was. And I needed to hear what my husband sounded like when he wasn't performing for an audience of one. The brochure might have been real, but the plan was a lie. And I was going to catch him in it, even if it broke my heart to do it. On Monday morning, I told Grant a lie that was as smooth as the ones he had been feeding me for months. I kissed his cheek in the kitchen, adjusting his tie with the affectionate fussiness of a devoted wife, and told him I was heading straight to the downtown branch of our bank to initiate the wire transfer. I told him it might take a few hours because of the compliance checks for such a large sum. He smiled, that predatory relief washing over his face again, and told me to drive safe. I did not go to the bank. Instead, I waited in my sedan 2 streets over, watching the rearview mirror until his gray Range Rover pulled out of our driveway. I kept 3 cars between us, a skill I had learned not from spy novels, but from 20 years of managing logistics fleets, where checking on drivers was part of the job. He did not drive to the Iron Hollow office. He drove toward the Gulch, a trendy, industrial chic neighborhood in Nashville filled with high-end lofts and overpriced coffee. He parked in front of a sleek co-working space that doubled as a cafe. A place with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that were meant to signal transparency, but mostly just offered a view of people pretending to work. I parked around the corner, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled my sunglasses down and wrapped a thick scarf around my head, looking more like a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi than a wife spying on her husband. I slipped into the cafe moments after him. The place was loud, filled with the hiss of espresso machines and the murmur of startup meetings. It was the perfect cover. Grant had taken a high-top table in the far corner, nestled in a semi-private alcove meant for phone calls. He had his back to the room, assuming he was anonymous in the crowd. I took a seat at a communal table behind a large decorative fern, close enough to hear him but hidden from his line of sight. He was already on the phone. He was not using his work voice, the booming baritone he reserved for clients. He was using a lower, smoother tone, the voice of a conspirator. "Do not worry, babe," he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "She is at the bank right now. It is done." My stomach twisted. He was talking to Warehouse Broker. I leaned back, pressing my ear toward the gap in the foliage. "Yeah, I know it was tight," Grant continued, taking a sip of his coffee. "But I told you I could handle her. She just needed a little romance, a little reminder of the good old days. God, it was exhausting. But it worked. The money hits the joint account today." I gripped my coffee cup so hard I thought the ceramic might crack. There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. Then he laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "No, we are not buying into the distribution hub," he said. "Are you crazy?" That brochure was just a prop. I printed it off a template online. The second that $1,800,000 clears into the joint savings, I am using half of it to plug the hole in the operating budget before the auditors get there next month. And the other half? Well, that is the war chest. I stopped breathing. There was no investment. There was no future. There was just a hole, a financial black hole he had dug, Likely through gambling or bad side deals he had hidden from me. He was not trying to build a legacy. He was trying to cover a crime. But wait, he said, cutting off the other person. Listen to me. The timing is key. Once the money is commingled, it is marital property. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state. If I file for divorce while the money is in her name, I get nothing. If I file after it hits our joint account, I am entitled to 50% immediately, and I can tie up the rest in litigation for years. I just need it to sit there for 24 hours. I felt cold. A deep, bone-shaking chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He had researched this. He had planned the legal assault down to the hour. The voice on the other end must have asked about me, about how I would react. Grant scoffed. Isla. She will be devastated. Sure, but she is weak. Tessa. She always wants to be loved again. She is so desperate to believe we are fixable that she handed me the knife and showed me where to stab. She is very easy to lead. Tessa. The name landed like a physical blow. Tessa Lane. I knew her. She was a logistics coordinator for a rival firm, a woman 10 years younger than me who was known in the industry for her aggressive tactics and her tendency to show up at trade shows in dresses that left little to the imagination. I had shaken her hand at the Christmas gala last year. She had smiled at me and told me I was lucky to have a man like Grant. So they were in this together. My husband and a woman who wanted my life were plotting to strip me of the only security I had left. Grant lowered his voice again. Finalizing the kill. I am meeting with Pike this afternoon to draft the papers, he said. I will let the money sit for 2 weeks to make it look like a failed reconciliation. And then I pull the trigger. 2 weeks. I file. Done. Then we pay off the loan sharks. We fix the books. And we are free. Loan sharks. The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. He was not just in debt to a bank. He was in debt to people who broke legs. That was the urgency. That was the fear I had seen in his eyes. He was drowning, and he had decided to use me as his life raft, even if it meant holding my head under water. Grant hung up the phone. He stood up, stretching his arms over his head, looking like a man who had just won a marathon. He tossed his empty cup into the trash and walked out of the cafe, whistling. I sat there for a long time. The noise of the coffee shop swirled around me, but I felt like I was in a vacuum. I looked at my hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked out to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and stared at the steering wheel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to his office and crash my car into his. I wanted to call him and scream that I knew everything. But I did not do any of those things. Grant had called me weak. He had called me easy to lead. He thought I was a desperate, aging woman who would pay any price for a crumb of affection. He was wrong. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. It was the last one I would shed for him. I turned the ignition key, the engine purring to life. He wanted a war. He wanted to play legal games with my inheritance. He gave me 2 weeks. He thought he was the one setting the timeline, but he had just given me a 14-day head start. I put the car in reverse. I was not going to the bank. I was going to see a lawyer. And I was going to make sure that when Grant Mitchell finally reached for that money, all he would grab was empty air. I drove 3 blocks away from the co-working space, pulled into the parking lot of a drugstore, and dialed the number. I did not call my mother. Who would panic? I did not call my sister. Who would rage? I called Renee Salazar. We had gone to university together 20 years ago, while I was studying logistics and supply chains. Renee was studying how to destroy people legally. She was now one of the most feared divorce attorneys in Nashville, a woman who treated emotional outbursts like inefficiencies in a system. She did not like small talk, and she did not like losing. She answered on the second ring. Renee, I said, it is Isla. I need you. Isla. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static. I have not heard from you in 6 months. Are you hurt? No. I said, but Grant is planning to file for divorce in 2 weeks. He is waiting for me to transfer my inheritance into our joint account so he can claim half of it. He has a mistress. He has debt. And he thinks I'm stupid. There was a silence on the line. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. When Renee spoke again, her voice had shifted. The friend was gone. The general had arrived. "Where are you right now?" she asked. "In my car." "Go home," Renee commanded. "Do not confront him. Do not cry. Do not throw his clothes on the lawn. If he calls, you answer. If he asks about the bank, you tell him there was a paperwork delay, but it is moving. You buy me 24 hours. Can you do that?" I took a breath. "I can do that." "Good. Be at my office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring every financial document you have. And Isla." "Yes." "Do not sleep with him. It complicates the timeline." I hung up. The war had begun. The next morning, I walked into Renee's office. It was a cold, glass-walled space that smelled of lemon polish and intimidation. Sitting in the leather chair opposite Renee's desk was the only other person I trusted with my life, my Aunt Marilyn Keene. Marilyn was 69 years old and made of cast iron. She had never liked Grant. At our wedding, she had told me he had shifting eyes. When I called her late last night, she had simply said, "I will be there," and hung up. Now, she sat with her cane resting against her knee, looking ready to bludgeon someone. Renee did not waste time with coffee or condolences. She laid a stack of documents on the sleek conference table. "We are going to execute a scorched earth defense," Renee said, her fingers resting on the top file. "Grant wants to trap the money. We are going to make sure the money does not just leave his reach. We are going to make it cease to exist as far as he is concerned." She pushed the papers toward me. "This is an irrevocable trust," Renee explained. "It is a legal entity that is separate from you. Once you sign your assets into this trust, you no longer technically own them. The trust owns them. You are the beneficiary, meaning you get the benefit of the money. But you do not have control over the principal, and more importantly, because you do not own it, it cannot be considered a marital asset in a divorce proceeding, provided we can prove the funds were never commingled." I looked at the papers. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. It was a vault, and the trustee I asked. Marilyn tapped her cane on the floor. "That would be me. Honey, I will control the purse strings. If you want to buy a stick of gum, I have to approve it. And if Grant Mitchell wants a penny, he has to come through me. And I think we both know how that conversation will go." "Is it legal?" I asked. "I do not want to go to jail for hiding assets." Renee shook her head. "It is perfectly legal. This is separate property. You have the right to do whatever you want with it. We are not hiding it. We are protecting it. We are securing it in a vehicle that predates the divorce filing. Grant is banking on you being slow. We are going to be fast." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. This was the point of no return. Signing this meant I was acknowledging that my marriage was over. It meant I was preparing for a life without the partner I had known for 2 decades. "Sign it," Marilyn said softly. He broke the contract first. "Isla, you are just enforcing the penalty clause." I signed. The ink looked dark and permanent against the white paper. "Now," Renee said, snatching the papers back to be notarized immediately. "We have work to do. We need to trace the assets. I need bank statements proving that the inheritance money went from your aunt's estate directly to your personal account and then directly to this trust. It cannot touch a joint account. Not for 1 second. Not for 1 cent. I nodded. "It is clean. I have the statements." "Good," Renee said. "Now, security. Grant has your passwords. I know you said he doesn't, but he does. If he is desperate enough to plan this, he is desperate enough to install a keylogger on your laptop." She handed me a checklist. It was terrifyingly thorough. "Open a new bank account at a bank you have never used before," she instructed. "Create a new email address for all communication with me. Do not access it from your home Wi-Fi. Use your cellular data only. Change the PIN on your phone. And most importantly, check your credit report. Right now." I frowned. "My credit, I have an 800 score. We pay off the cards every month." Renee gave me a look that was equal parts pity and warning. "Just check it." I pulled out my phone and logged into the credit monitoring app I hadn't opened in years. The Face ID spun for a moment, and then the dashboard loaded. My stomach dropped. There was a red flag notification at the top of the screen. New inquiry. Yesterday, I clicked on it. It was a hard inquiry from a lending institution I did not recognize. For a personal line of credit in the amount of $50,000, the application status was pending. I turned the phone around and showed it to Renee. "I did not apply for this," I said, my voice trembling. Renee looked at the screen, her eyes narrowing. "He is using your social security number," she said. "He's trying to leverage your credit because his is likely shot. If he gets this loan approved before he files, half that debt becomes yours. Freeze it," Renee ordered. "Freeze all 3 bureaus. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Do it now." I sat there in the office chair, my fingers flying across the screen. Locking down my financial identity, I felt a cold, hard rage settling in my chest. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. Grant wasn't just trying to take my money. He was trying to ruin my name. He was willing to saddle me with $50,000 of debt just to buy himself a few more weeks of survival. "I am done," I said. Looking up, "The credit is frozen. The trust is signed." Renee nodded. "Excellent. Now, you have to go back to the house. You have to walk in there, look him in the eye, and tell him the bank needs another 48 hours. You have to lie, Isla, and you have to be convincing." I stood up. I felt different, heavier, but solid, like a stone. "I can do it," I said. Marilyn stood up and hugged me. She smelled of lavender and steel. "You are a Mitchell," she whispered. "We do not break, we just wait." I left the office and walked out into the bright Nashville sunlight. The city looked the same, but the world had shifted. I had walked in as a victim, a wife trying to save her marriage. I was walking out as a beneficiary, a woman protecting her future. I got into my car and checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. I looked normal. I looked like a woman who was about to go home and cook dinner for her husband. I started the engine. I wasn't going home to save my marriage. I was going home to strip the house of its copper wiring before the arsonist lit the match. Grant Mitchell wanted a war. He had no idea he had just armed the enemy. Walking back into my house that afternoon felt like stepping onto a stage where the spotlight was already burning hot. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, practicing the look of a frustrated but dutiful wife. I loosened a strand of hair to make myself look frazzled. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the leather interior, and then I opened the car door and stepped into the role of a lifetime. Grant was waiting in the kitchen. He was leaning against the granite island, his arms crossed, his posture rigid. He was trying to look casual, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He looked like a coiled spring. "Well," he asked, the words shooting out of him before the door had even clicked shut behind me. "Is it done?" "Did you get the confirmation number?" I let out a long, theatrical sigh and dropped my purse onto the counter with a heavy thud. It was a nightmare. "Grant," I said, rubbing my temples. I sat down on one of the bar stools, slumping my shoulders. I was there for 2 hours, apparently, because the amount is over $10,000 and coming from an estate trust. It triggered a mandatory compliance review. The bank manager said it is a Patriot Act protocol. They have to verify the source of funds before they can clear the wire into a joint account. Grant's face went rigid. His eyes darted back and forth, processing the information. "Compliance review," he repeated. "That should be instant. I move money for the business all the time. It never takes days." I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "That is what I told them," I said, injecting a note of indignation into my voice. "I said my husband needs this for a closing on Monday, but the manager insisted. He said with federal regulations tightening on large transfers, they have a 48-hour hold. There was nothing I could do. Grant, I signed the authorization, but the funds will not actually move until Wednesday morning." I watched him carefully. This was the test. If he pushed too hard, he would reveal his desperation. If he screamed, he would break character. He was trapped by his own ego. He had spent years telling me he was a financial wizard, a man who understood the complex machinery of banking. If he claimed not to know about these completely fabricated delays, he would look incompetent. He clenched his jaw so hard, I saw the muscle feather beneath his skin. He took a deep breath through his nose, forcing himself to calm down. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay. It is just 48 hours. We can stall the developers. I can make a call. Wednesday morning is the absolute latest. Isla, you have to stay on them. I promised I would. I promised I would call the bank every hour if I had to." He nodded, satisfied that his puppet was still dancing, even if the music had slowed down. He walked out of the room to make his call to the developers, which I knew was actually a panic call to his loan sharks or Tessa. The moment he was gone, the clock started ticking in my head. I had bought myself 2 days. I needed to make them count. The next morning, Grant went into the office early, likely to shuffle papers and try to hold off his creditors. I waited exactly 15 minutes after his Range Rover disappeared down the street, and then I drove to the bank, not to the teller windows, but to the vault. The air inside the safety deposit box viewing room was cool and smelled of old paper and dust. I placed my key on the metal counter. The bank officer turned hers, and we slid the long metal box out. This was the physical heart of my inheritance. The wire transfer was just numbers on a screen. But this box held the things that actually mattered. I opened the lid. Inside lay the deed to the commercial storage lot near the airport, the property that generated the passive income Grant was so desperate to capture. Next to it was the original lease agreement with the current tenants, and beneath that, wrapped in velvet, were my grandmother's emerald earrings and the diamond tennis bracelet my aunt had left me. I did not leave a single scrap of paper. I emptied the box completely, shoving the deeds and the jewelry into my oversized tote bag. I felt like a thief robbing my own life. I signed the visitation card with a steady hand and walked out into the sunshine. I drove straight to a private storage facility across town where Renee had instructed me to rent a small, secure locker under my maiden name. I locked everything inside. My phone buzzed. It was Grant. "Hey, babe. Just checking in. Did you call the bank manager yet?" I typed back immediately. "On hold with them now. They say it is processing." It was a lie, but it bought me another hour. I returned home around noon. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary, and more like a crime scene waiting to happen. I went upstairs to our bedroom. Grant had been careless lately. He had been so confident in his victory that he had stopped hiding his tracks as well as he used to. I went into his home office. He usually kept the door locked, but in his rush this morning, the latch hadn't fully engaged. I pushed it open. The room smelled of his cologne and stale stress. I went straight to his desk. I wasn't looking for love letters. I was looking for leverage. I opened the bottom drawer, reaching all the way to the back, behind the hanging files. My fingers brushed against hard plastic. I pulled it out. It was a burner phone, a cheap, prepaid model. I pressed the power button, but it was dead. Smart. But underneath the phone was something far more damning. It was a single sheet of paper, face down. I turned it over. It was a draft of a limited power of attorney document. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scanned the legal text. It was drafted to give Grant Mitchell full authority to act on behalf of Isla Mitchell regarding all financial transactions, banking transfers, and real estate dispositions. It was dated 3 weeks ago. And at the bottom, on the signature line for the principal, my line, there were several attempts at a signature. They were traced in pencil, faint and shaky, as if someone had been practicing. He hadn't just planned to manipulate me. He had prepared a backup plan in case I said no. If I hadn't agreed to the transfer, he was going to try to forge my signature and take the money anyway. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was attempted grand larceny. I pulled out my phone and took high-resolution photos of the document, focusing on the practice signatures. I sent them to Renee via an encrypted messaging app. Then I put the paper back exactly where I found it. I put the dead phone back. I closed the drawer. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Grant. "I love you. Thank you for doing this for us. We are going to have a great life." I stared at the screen. The audacity of it made me nauseous. He was texting me love notes while a forgery kit sat in his desk drawer. I started documenting everything. I went through the house, taking photos of the expensive golf clubs he had bought last month, the new watch he had claimed was a gift from a client. The receipts I found crumpled in his wastebasket for dinners at steakhouses I had never been to. I was building a timeline of financial infidelity to match the emotional one. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone chimed with a different tone. It was a notification from the secure email app I had set up with Renee. I opened it. The subject line was one word: done. The body of the email was brief. The irrevocable trust has been filed and recorded with the county clerk. The retitling of the assets is complete. The funds have been successfully moved from your personal holding account into the trust's account. As of 2:30 this afternoon, Isla Mitchell technically owns $0 of that inheritance. It is untouchable. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. The weight on my chest, the crushing anxiety that had been suffocating me for weeks, suddenly lifted. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. Grant would be home soon. He would walk in performing his act, playing the stressed but hopeful husband, waiting for his payout. He would look at me and see a victim. He would see a foolish woman who was 48 hours away from handing him a fortune. He had no idea that the woman standing in the window was already gone. He was about to come home to a ghost, and legally speaking, he was about to divorce a pauper. I deleted the email notification, slipped my phone into my pocket, and went downstairs to start dinner. If I was going to play the good wife for 48 more hours, I might as well make sure he was well fed before he starved. Wednesday morning arrived with a silence that felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. The house was quiet, but it was a deceptive quiet. Grant was pacing in the living room, his phone in his hand, checking his banking app every 30 seconds. He had dressed for work, but he hadn't left. He was waiting for the notification. He was waiting for the moment his life was saved and mine was effectively over. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker. I poured a cup, watched the steam rise, and counted to 10. This was it. The performance was about to end. I walked into the living room. Grant looked up immediately, his eyes wild and hopeful. "Did it clear?" he asked. I took a sip of coffee. I did not sit down. I stood near the archway, ensuring I had a clear path to the front door. "I just got off the phone with the branch manager," I said. My voice was steady, perhaps a little too steady for a woman who was supposed to be distressed. "There is a problem with the Patriot Act verification. Because the trust originated from an out-of-state holding, they have flagged the transfer for a secondary audit." Grant froze. His smile died a violent death. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice low. "It means they cannot release the funds today," I said. "They said the secondary audit takes 7 to 10 business days." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the blood drain from Grant's face, leaving him a sickly, waxen color. Then, just as quickly, the blood rushed back, turning his skin a mottled, angry red. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. 10 days was not just an inconvenience. 10 days was a death sentence. 10 days meant he missed his deadline with the loan sharks. 10 days meant the hole he had dug was going to collapse on top of him. 10 days, he whispered, then he roared, a sound that tore through the house like a physical blow. 10 days. "Are you kidding me?" He threw his phone. It smashed against the wall just inches from my head, the screen shattering into a spider web of glass before clattering to the hardwood floor. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I just looked at the dent in the drywall and then back at him. Grant marched toward me, invading my space, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee and panic. He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was hard, bruising. The charming husband, the partner, the man who wanted to renew our vows in Italy, he was gone. In his place was a desperate, cornered animal. "You did this," he screamed, shaking me. "You messed up the paperwork, didn't you?" "You hesitated. I told you to go on Monday. If you had gone on Monday, we would be clear by now. You stupid, useless woman. Do you have any idea what you have done?" He shoved me backward. I stumbled, catching myself against the kitchen counter. My hip hit the granite hard, sending a shock of pain down my leg. Grant spun around, looking for something to destroy. He grabbed the decorative ceramic bowl on the island, a bowl we had bought together in Charleston 5 years ago, and hurled it against the floor. It exploded. Shards of blue and white pottery flew across the room, skittering under the cabinets. "Fix it," he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Call them back. Tell them to release it today. I need that money today." I stood straight, brushing a lock of hair from my face. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not cry. I did not beg for his forgiveness. I cannot fix federal regulations. "Grant," I said. My voice was cold, devoid of the empathy he was used to extracting from me. "I also want it to be fast, but I do not control the bank." That sentence, the admission that I was powerless, was the spark that burned the last of his control. He realized he couldn't charm the bank. He couldn't bully the bank, and he couldn't manipulate the timeline. He was impotent, and he hated it. He screamed a curse word that echoed off the high ceilings. He kicked the cabinet door, leaving a scuff mark on the white wood. Then he grabbed his car keys from the counter. "I have to go," he muttered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape hatch. I have to handle this." He was not going to the office. He was going to find Tessa. He was going to find his creditors. He was going to beg for an extension that I knew he would not get without collateral he no longer had. He stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled in their frames. I heard the engine of his Range Rover roar to life and tires screech as he peeled out of the driveway. The moment he was gone, the adrenaline that had been holding me upright began to fade, replaced by a cold, efficient clarity. I looked at the shattered bowl on the floor. I looked at the dent in the wall. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was 10:15 in the morning. I called the locksmith. "I have an emergency." I said, "I need all exterior locks changed. Now." He was there in 20 minutes. While he drilled out the cylinders on the front door, I packed a single suitcase. I did not take much. Just clothes, my laptop, and the few personal items that actually meant something to me. I moved through the house like a ghost, dismantling my presence. Next, the security team arrived. I had scheduled them 2 days ago. Anticipating this exact explosion, they installed a wireless camera facing the driveway and another covering the front porch. I connected the feed to my phone and to Renee's cloud server. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the house was secured, the locks were new, the cameras were blinking. I wrote a note on a piece of yellow legal pad paper. I did not write a letter. I did not write a paragraph. I wrote 3 sentences. "Grant, I do not feel safe here when you are like this. I am staying elsewhere until you calm down. Do not come looking for me." I taped it to the kitchen island, right next to the shattered remains of the ceramic bowl. I left the shards there. I wanted him to see what he had broken. I walked out the front door, locking the new deadbolt with a satisfying click. I got into my car and drove straight to Aunt Marilyn's house on the other side of town. Marilyn was waiting on the porch, her face grim. She did not say a word. She just opened the door and let me in. That night, my phone became a weapon. It started at 7 o'clock. Grant must have come home and found his key didn't work. Text 1. 7:03 p.m. The key is stuck. Open the door. Text 2, 7:10 p.m. Isla. Where are you? The locks are changed. Are you insane? Open this door right now. Text 3, 7:15 p.m. I see the note. Look, I am sorry I yelled. I was just stressed. Please come home. We need to talk about the bank. I sat in Marilyn's guest room, watching the messages roll in. I did not reply. Text 4, 8:30 p.m. Stop playing games. You are making this worse. If you do not answer me, I'm going to call the police and report you missing. Text 5, 9:45 p.m. You are being a child. You think running away changes anything. The money is still coming. You are still my wife. You will come back when you run out of cash. Text 6:11:20 p.m. Watch your back. Isla, you do not know who you are messing with. I took screenshots of every single message. I forwarded them to Renee. This was not just a temper tantrum. This was evidence of instability. This was the documentation we needed to prove that leaving the marital home was not abandonment, but a necessary flight for safety. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed hidden. I did not go to the grocery store. I did not go to my usual gym. I worked remotely from Marilyn's sunroom. Grant tried to track me down. He called my sister. He showed up at my old office, but I had closed the circle tight. He must have been scrambling. Without the money. His creditors were closing in. Tessa was likely pressuring him. He needed to stop the bleeding. And in his mind, the only way to do that was to force the issue legally. He thought that if he filed for divorce, he could get an emergency court order to freeze marital assets specifically. The inheritance transfer he believed was currently pending in the banking ether. Exactly 14 days after I walked out of that house, Renee called me. "We got it." She said, "Got what, the filing?" Renee said, "Grant Mitchell just filed for divorce. He is citing irreconcilable differences. But here's the kicker. Isla. He filed an emergency ex parte motion asking the judge to freeze all pending financial transfers, specifically citing a large inheritance wire that he claims is marital property currently in transit." I let out a long breath. He walked right into it. I said, "He did." Renee confirmed. "He went on official court record claiming that money is in flight. He swore under penalty of perjury that he is entitled to half of it and that you are trying to hide it. He thinks he has frozen the money mid-air. He had no idea the air was empty. He had no idea the money had landed safely in a trust 2 weeks ago, long before he signed that affidavit. By filing this motion, he had just admitted to the court that his primary motivation for the divorce was capturing that specific asset." I hung up the phone and looked out at Marilyn's garden. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard satisfaction of a trap well sprung. Grant thought he was freezing my assets. In reality, he had just frozen himself out of the only lifeline he had left. The mediation was set for the following week, and I was ready to watch him burn. The man who served me the papers was polite, wearing a windbreaker that looked too thin for the crisp morning air. He found me at Aunt Marilyn's house at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. He asked for my name, handed me a thick envelope sealed with tape, and walked away before I could even close the door. I sat at Marilyn's kitchen table and opened it. The header was bold and aggressive: emergency motion for temporary injunction and preservation of marital assets. Grant was not just suing for divorce, he was suing for survival. I read the affidavit attached to the motion. In it, Grant swore under penalty of perjury that a wire transfer of approximately $1,800,000 was currently in transit or pending bank clearance between my separate estate and our joint account. He argued that because I had verbally committed this money to the marital partnership to cover urgent business liabilities, the court should consider it marital property and order its immediate release to pay off debts. He was asking the judge to reach into the banking system and grab money that he believed was floating in the digital ether. He was so convinced by my performance regarding the Patriot Act delay that he had put it in writing. He had built his entire legal strategy on a lie I had fed him in our kitchen. I drove to Renee's office an hour later. She read the motion, and for the first time in our friendship, she laughed. It was a sharp, dry sound. "He has trapped himself," Renee said, tossing the document onto her desk. "He has gone on record stating the money is pending. When we prove that the money was never pending, that it was safely tucked into a trust 2 weeks ago, his credibility with the court will evaporate. He is admitting he is desperate for cash to pay obligations. We need to know what those obligations are." That was when the forensic accountant, a quiet man named Mr. Vance, who wore thick glasses and smelled of peppermint, spoke up. He had been reviewing the digital copies of the financial records I had pulled from the house before I left. "Mr. Mitchell is not investing in the business," Mr. Vance said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. "He is stripping it." I looked at the rows of numbers. "Iron Hollow Freight and Dispatch is technically insolvent," he explained. "Over the last 8 months, there have been systematic withdrawals categorized as consulting fees paid to 3 different shell companies registered in Delaware. These companies have no web presence, no employees, and no physical addresses. The money goes out, and it disappears." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Where is it going?" I asked. "Gambling debts or high-risk private lending?" Mr. Vance replied. I found a recurring payment to an entity that looks like a repayment plan for a hard money loan, the kind with predatory interest rates. He is paying 20% interest monthly. That is why he is desperate. He is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and Paul is likely the kind of person who breaks kneecaps. This was the hole Grant had been talking about. He wasn't trying to expand the business with my inheritance. He was trying to buy his life back. But there was more. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope containing the photos I had taken in Grant's office. I slid them toward Renee. I found this in his desk. I said, "It is a draft of a limited power of attorney. Look at the signature line." Renee picked up the photo. She squinted at the faint pencil marks where someone had tried to trace my signature over and over again, intent to defraud. Renee whispered. She looked at me, her eyes hard. "Isla, this is not just divorce court material. This is criminal. He was practicing to forge your name. If you hadn't agreed to the transfer, or if he thought you were stalling too long, he was going to try to move the money himself." "That explains the burner phone," I said, handing her the second photo. "He has a second phone. He uses it to talk to his creditors. And to her, Tessa Lane. In the days since I left the house, I had done my own investigation. It was not difficult. People like Tessa lived their lives for an audience. I had found her Instagram account, which was public. I opened my iPad and showed them the profile. "Here," I said, pointing to a photo dated 3 months ago. The photo showed a diamond bracelet draped over a slender wrist, resting against the steering wheel of a luxury car. The caption read, "Because I deserve it." I recognized that bracelet. It was identical to one I had seen in a catalog on Grant's desk, a catalog he had claimed was junk mail. "And here," I continued, scrolling to another post. This one was a selfie taken at a rooftop bar in Atlanta. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was the back of a man's head. He was wearing a gray suit jacket, the same custom jacket I had bought for Grant for his birthday. The date of the post matched a weekend Grant had told me he was at a logistics conference in Chicago. While he was telling me we had to cut the grocery budget, while he was screaming at me about the cost of dry cleaning, he was buying diamonds for a woman who documented his infidelity for likes on the internet. Renee looked at the evidence, the fraud, the theft, the mistress, and nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "we have enough." She stood up and walked to the whiteboard on the wall. She drew 2 large circles. "Strategy A," she said, tapping the first circle. "We prove the inheritance is separate property held in an irrevocable trust. We show the deed and the transfer dates. This kills his motion to freeze the assets because the assets are not his to freeze." She tapped the second circle. "Strategy B. If he argues, if he tries to claim commingling, or if he tries to drag this out to force a settlement, we put the fraud on the table. We introduce the forensic accounting of the shell companies. We introduce the forged power of attorney. We threaten to refer the case to the district attorney for embezzlement and identity theft." She turned to me. "He wants a divorce settlement. Isla, we are going to offer him a plea bargain. He walks away with his debt and his mistress, and you keep everything that is yours, or he goes to prison." I looked at the board. It was clean. It was logical. It was ruthless. "There is a mandatory mediation scheduled for next Monday." Renee said, "The court requires us to try to settle before the hearing on his emergency motion. I will be there." I said. Renee leaned in, her expression serious. "You need to be ready. Isla, this will not be the Grant you know. He is cornered. He is going to be aggressive. He is going to try to trigger you. He knows your buttons. He installed them. I know." I said. For the rest of the week, I practiced. I stood in front of the mirror in Aunt Marilyn's guest bathroom. I practiced keeping my face completely still. I practiced untangling my emotions from my expressions. I thought about the diamond bracelet on Tessa's wrist. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he threw that bowl. I stripped away the sadness layer by layer until all that was left was a smooth, hard surface. I was not going there to argue. I was not going there to ask why. I was going there to deliver a reality check. Sunday night, the evening before the mediation. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Renee. "Heads up, My paralegal just got the attendee list for tomorrow. I stared at the typing bubble, waiting for the rest. Grant is bringing a support person to the mediation. He has listed Tessa Lane as his emotional support and business consultant. I lowered the phone. He was bringing her. He was bringing the woman he had cheated on me with into the room where we were supposed to dissolve our marriage. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to parade his upgrade in front of me to make me emotional, to make me cry, to make me sign a check just to make the pain stop. He thought Tessa was his secret weapon. He thought her presence would break me. I stood up and walked to the closet to pick out my outfit for the morning. I chose a suit that was sharp, tailored, an expensive one I had bought with my own money years ago. Grant Mitchell thought he was bringing a shark to a swimming pool. He had no idea he was walking into a shark tank. I turned off the light. I slept soundly for the first time in months. I smoothed the lapels of my navy blazer and stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor. The reception area of the mediation center was designed to be soothing, with its beige walls and abstract art. But the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I was not the woman who had fled her home 2 weeks ago with a suitcase and a broken heart. I was someone else entirely. I had spent the last 14 days deconstructing my grief and replacing it with armor. My hair was pulled back in a severe, polished knot. My makeup was minimal but flawless. I walked with the cadence of a woman who owned the building, not a woman begging for a settlement. Grant was already there, standing near the water cooler. When he saw me, he straightened up, adjusting his tie. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were poorly concealed, and his suit hung a little looser on his frame than it had a month ago. He looked at me, expecting to see red-rimmed eyes or a trembling lip. Instead, he saw a stranger, but he was not alone. Sitting on a plush velvet bench near the conference room door was Tessa Lane. She was scrolling on her phone, wearing a white dress that was aggressively bridal for a Monday morning legal proceeding. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up. Her eyes raked over me, a smirk playing on her lips. She was here to mark her territory. She was here to show me that she was the future and I was the past. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to scream or cry so she could comfort Grant and solidify her role as his savior. I did not break stride. I did not look at her dress. I did not look at her face. I looked through her as if she were a smudge on a window pane. I walked past her without a flicker of acknowledgement and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the conference room. The smirk vanished from her periphery. Indifference is a weapon far sharper than hate. Inside the room, the air was frigid. Renee was already seated, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. Across the table sat Darren Pike, Grant's attorney. He was a large man who took up too much space, spreading his files out like a general claiming territory. Grant followed me in, leaving Tessa in the hallway. He took his seat next to Pike, shooting me a look that was a mix of arrogance and anxiety. He tapped his fingers on the table. "Let us get this over with," Grant said, his voice rough. "I have a company to run." Darren Pike cleared his throat, opening a thick binder. "Mr. Mitchell is looking for an amicable resolution," Pike began, his voice booming. "However, given the urgent financial nature of the marital estate, we are starting with a non-negotiable demand. We require the immediate release of 50% of the liquid assets currently held by Mrs. Mitchell, specifically the inheritance transfer of $1,800,000. We also require a liquidation schedule for the primary residence to satisfy outstanding marital debts." Pike leaned back, crossing his arms. "We know you are holding the funds, Mrs. Mitchell," Pike added, looking at me. "We know about the Patriot Act delay excuse. The court does not look kindly on spouses who hide assets in transit. If you sign the release authorization today, we might be inclined to waive the claim on your retirement accounts." Grant nodded, staring at me intensely. "Just sign it. Isla, stop the games. We need that cash flow to clear the books." I looked at Renee. She didn't blink. She simply reached into her briefcase and pulled out the thin folder we had prepared. It made a soft, sliding sound as it moved across the mahogany table, coming to rest directly in front of Pike. "There is no need for a release authorization," Renee said, her voice calm and pleasant. Because there are no funds in transit. Pike frowned. Picking up the folder. What are you talking about? Open it, Renee said. Pike flipped the folder open. Grant leaned in, his eyes scanning the document. This is a certificate of trust, Renee explained. Dated 14 days ago, it confirms that the entirety of Isla's inheritance, the cash, the commercial property deed, and the jewelry was successfully transferred into the Isla Mitchell Irrevocable Trust. The transfer is complete. The funds are not pending. They are settled. Grant's face went blank. He blinked, trying to process the words. Irrevocable, Grant whispered. That is correct, Renee said. The assets are no longer Isla's personal property. They belong to the trust. Isla is merely the beneficiary. And since the inheritance was separate property that was never commingled with marital funds, not for 1 second, it is outside the jurisdiction of this divorce. You cannot divide what she does not own. Pike slammed the folder shut. His face turned a shade of dark red. This is fraudulent conveyance, Pike shouted, pointing a finger at Renee. She moved these assets in anticipation of litigation. She knew the divorce was coming. We will file a motion to claw this back immediately. You cannot just hide $2 million 2 weeks before a filing. Renee smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. Actually, Renee said, sliding a second photograph across the table, we moved the assets to protect them from criminal activity. She pointed to the photo of the forged power of attorney document I had found in Grant's desk. This is a draft of a limited power of attorney, Renee said, her voice dropping an octave. Found in Mr. Mitchell's desk? As you can see, someone spent a considerable amount of time practicing Isla's signature. We believe Mr. Mitchell intended to access these separate funds without her consent. The trust was established as a necessary protective measure against identity theft and fraud. Pike looked at the photo. He looked at the shaky pencil tracings of my name. He went very still. Grant looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth to deny it, but no sound came out. He knew the document was real. He knew his fingerprints were all over it. We are happy to debate the anticipation of litigation argument in open court, Renee continued. But if we do, we will also be submitting this photo, along with the burner phone records and the testimony of a forensic accountant regarding the embezzlement of funds from Iron Hollow Freight. Renee slid one final piece of paper across the table. This is the actual marital estate, she said. It was a balance sheet. It showed our joint checking account, which had a balance of $4,000. It showed the credit card debt Grant had racked up. It showed the $50,000 line of credit he had tried to open in my name. And it showed the massive, crippling loans attached to his shell companies. There is no pie. Mr. Pike, Renee said, repeating the line she had saved for this moment. There is only debt. Your client is insolvent, and the inheritance he is banking on, it is locked in a vault he does not have the key to. Grant stared at the paper. His hands were shaking violently now. The reality was crashing down on him. There was no bailout coming. The loan sharks were not going to be paid. Tessa was waiting in the hallway for a rich man, and Grant was about to walk out a pauper. Isla. Grant choked out, looking at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. Isla, you cannot do this. They will kill me. You know they will come for me. I looked at him. I remembered the way he had screamed at me in the kitchen. I remembered the bowl shattering on the floor. I remembered the wink he had given me 5 minutes ago when he thought he had won. I did not say a word. I just closed my notebook. The room was silent for a long 10 seconds. Then, Darren Pike slowly closed his binder. He pushed his chair back. He did not look at Grant. He looked at the photo of the forged signature, and then he looked at his watch. Mr. Mitchell, Pike said. His voice was no longer booming. It was quiet and final. If these documents are authentic, if there are no liquid assets to pay my retainer, and if there is evidence of attempted forgery regarding the opposing party. Pike stood up. Buttoning his suit jacket, I cannot continue to represent you in this matter. I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. Grant looked up at his lawyer, his mouth hanging open. Wait, Grant stammered. Darren, sit down. We can fix this. She is bluffing. Pike shook his head. He picked up his briefcase. She is not bluffing. Grant. She just checkmated you. Good luck. Pike walked out of the room without looking back. I watched Grant. He was alone at the long table. The man who wanted to break me was now sitting in the wreckage of his own life. He looked small. He looked terrified. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt absolutely nothing for him. Shall we go? I asked Renee. We stood up. Grant didn't move. He was staring at the table, at the empty space where the money was supposed to be. We walked out into the hallway. Tessa Lane was still sitting there, scrolling on her phone. When she saw Pike storming toward the elevators and us walking out calm and collected, she stood up, confused. She looked at the conference room door, where Grant was still sitting alone. I stopped in front of her. I looked at her white dress. He is all yours, I said. And then I walked to the elevator, pressed the down button, and waited for the doors to close on my past. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. Darren Pike was already packing his briefcase, snapping the latches shut with a finality that made Grant flinch. Grant looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide and wet with panic. Darren, please, Grant stammered, reaching out a hand. You cannot leave. We have a hearing next week. I will pay you. I just need a little time to move some funds around. Pike paused. He looked down at Grant with a mixture of pity and disgust. You do not have funds to move. Grant, Pike said coldly, and my retainer is $20,000. Payable up front before I file another single piece of paper, unless you have that in cash right now. I am done. Grant slumped back in his chair. He didn't have $20,000. He probably didn't have $20. The reality of his financial ruin was crashing down on him all at once. He was exposed. The shield of arrogance he had worn for months had shattered, leaving him shivering and pathetic. Renee Salazar did not give him time to mourn his ego. She slid a single document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. Here is the exit ramp, Renee said. Her voice was not kind, but it was efficient. Grant looked at the paper, his vision likely blurring. What is this? He asked. It is a settlement, Renee explained. Isla keeps the house. Isla keeps the entirety of the trust assets. You keep Iron Hollow freight and dispatch, along with all liabilities, debts, and loans attached to it. You walk away with your business and your freedom. Grant shook his head violently. No way. I cannot take the debt. The business is underwater. I need the house equity. I need cash. Renee leaned forward. She tapped the photo of the forged power of attorney document that was still sitting on the table. Then we go to trial, Renee said. And the first piece of evidence I submit to the judge and to the district attorney is this forgery, attempted grand larceny, identity theft, fraud. She let the words hang there. If we go that route, Renee continued, you will not just be broke, Grant. You will be in prison, and I do not think you will do very well in prison. Grant looked at the photo. He looked at me. He was searching for the woman who used to soften the blows for him, the wife who would take on extra work to pay off his credit cards, the partner who would fix his messes. He did not find her. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I was not angry anymore. I was just done. Grant picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the tip of the pen tapped a staccato rhythm against the paper. He looked at the document. He looked at the door. He knew he had to leave. He had creditors waiting. He had a mistress expecting a payday. He needed to get out of this room before the walls closed in completely. He signed. It was a jagged, ugly scrawl, nothing like the confident signature he used to practice. He threw the pen down. Are we done? He whispered. We are done, I said. Grant stood up. He did not look at me again. He grabbed his jacket and rushed toward the door, desperate to escape the scene of his defeat. Renee and I followed him out, moving at a leisurely pace. In the hallway, Tessa Lane was standing exactly where we had left her. She had refreshed her lipstick. When the doors opened, she stood up, a bright, expectant smile plastered on her face. She looked at Grant, who was pale and sweating, and then she looked at me. Well, Tessa asked, stepping forward to claim her prize. "Did you sign the papers? When does the money release?" Grant stopped. He looked at Tessa. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He couldn't bring himself to say it. He couldn't admit that the golden goose was dead. I stopped walking. I turned to face them both. This was the moment, the final cut. He signed the papers. I said calmly. Tessa's smile widened. She wrapped her arm around Grant's waist, looking at me with triumph. "Great," she said. "I am glad you finally saw reason." "Isla?" I smiled back. It was a genuine smile. I did. I said, "That is why I kept everything." Tessa frowned. Her brow furrowed. "What? There is no money." "Tessa," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "the inheritance is in an irrevocable trust. It belongs to me. Grant just signed a settlement giving up all claims to my assets. He also agreed to take on 100% of his business debts." I looked at Grant, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "He is broke, Tessa. Actually, he is worse than broke. He is drowning in debt, and he has nothing to offer you but a failing company and a leased car." The silence in the hallway was heavy. Tessa pulled her arm away from Grant's waist as if he were burning hot. She took a step back. She looked at Grant, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to tell her I was lying. "Grant," she asked, her voice sharp, "tell her she is lying. Tell me we got the capital." Grant looked up. His eyes were hollow. I tried. "Tess." She had it locked up. I had to sign. They had evidence. Tessa's face changed instantly. The mask of the supportive girlfriend vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a woman who had bet on the wrong horse. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You idiot," she spat. She grabbed her purse from the bench. "You told me you had this handled," she said, her voice rising. "You told me you were liquid. I am not doing this with you if you are poor. Grant, I have my own bills." She turned on her heel and walked toward the elevators, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. "Tessa," Grant called out, his voice cracking. "Tessa, wait. We can figure it out." She didn't even look back. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and she was gone. Grant stood alone in the hallway. He looked from the elevator to me. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare. He had lost his wife. He had lost his fortune. And in the span of 30 seconds, he had lost the woman he destroyed his marriage for. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was crouching on the floor, his head in his hands. I looked at him one last time. "Goodbye, Grant," I said. I walked away with Renee, leaving him sitting on the floor of the hallway, a king with no kingdom. That night, I went back to the house, my house. I had spent the afternoon with the security team, ensuring the new system was fully operational. I made a cup of tea and sat in the living room, listening to the rain fall against the windows. It was peaceful. The house felt lighter, as if the walls themselves were relieved that he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, the proximity alarm on my phone chimed. I pulled up the camera feed. Grant was standing on the front porch. He was soaked to the bone. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his expensive suit was ruined. He looked aged, as if the last 12 hours had taken 10 years of his life. He tried the door handle. It was locked. He tried his key. It didn't fit. He pounded on the door. "Isla," he shouted over the rain. "Isla, please open the door." I walked to the foyer. I did not open the door. I stood on the other side of the solid wood, safe and warm. "Isla, I have nowhere to go," he yelled. His voice was breaking. "Tessa kicked me out. The guys, the lenders, they are calling me. They are going to hurt me. Isla, you have to help me. I am your husband," he sobbed, a raw, ugly sound. "I am sorry I made a mistake. Please, just let me in. We can fix this. You always fix it. Save me. Isla." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I closed my eyes. For 20 years, that plea had been my command. Every time he failed, every time he fell, I was there to catch him. I had caught him so many times I had forgotten how to stand on my own. But not tonight. I reached out and pressed the button on the intercom. "Grant," I said. He stopped pounding. "Isla." "Oh, thank God. Isla, open up. Please." I took a deep breath. "I saved you for 20 years. Grant," I said softly. "I saved you from your bad decisions. I saved you from your failures. I saved you from yourself." I paused. But today, I saved myself. I released the intercom button. I reached up and turned the heavy deadbolt, locking it with a final decisive click that echoed through the empty house. I turned off the porch light, plunging him into darkness. Then I turned around and walked back into my living room, leaving the rain and the man who used to be my husband on the other side of the door, where they belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on Isla's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Morgan Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. See you in the next one.